I'm waiting for Disney to write its own Bible and to start observances on its streaming services. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel for intelligent people wanting to discuss global issues and ideas. My name is Crispin. I've noticed a significant change in what is considered virtuous for a corporation. Previously, we would have thought about it in terms of what is specific to the company. For example, a company that is very ethical in its supply chain, doesn't exploit workers in places like China, that makes sure it has integrity in the quality of the product, takes accountability for things like safety, pays its workers appropriately, doesn't misrepresent its advertising. Those sorts of things is what we would have thought is an ethical company and how we would hold companies to account. That no longer seems to be the standard. In fact, I would say that a lot of these companies get away with exploiting all of those things while at the same time projecting an image of moral authority. And this is something that I find really interesting, that previously our sources of moral authority would have been completely different, and people would have seen companies as essentially psychopathic. And I'm very curious, not just that this is happening, I think we can measure that objectively, but why it's happening and where this potentially could be going and how that's impacting, our lives. So, for example, back in, and we'll go right back to our sources of moral authority. Many centuries ago, in the 17th century, I'll say 18th century, Edward Gibbon wrote his enormous magnum opus, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It was easily the best text for the next couple of centuries on Roman history. And he ascribed a cause to the fall of the Roman Empire that created a bit of a stir. He laid the fall of the Roman Empire at the feet of the rise of the Christian religion. The judeo-christian faith gave a sense of replacing the previous Roman values. And this is what Edward Gibbon criticized. He said, good Roman virtue, the silver virtues of temperance, justice, courage, that sort of sense of patriotism, that was replaced by this kind of meek religion, and that led to the fall of the Roman Empire. I don't think that's correct. I think most scholars would agree that is a false reading of the history, that in fact that the major seeds of the Roman Empire's fall was in the 3rd century AD, when the Christians were being persecuted under Diocletian and Decimus. But in fact, the rise of Christianity, its continued spread, was a symptom of the weakening of the Roman Empire and the Roman state. The spread of Christianity, its appeal to the disaffected, the dispossessed, gave it spread in a sort of what we would consider viral today, a viral manner, to account for the devastation that was being wrought across the Roman lands. Now, it has been many centuries since then. And for whatever you can say about like the judeo-christian faith, and let's put aside the church for a moment, let's just talk about its social impact. There was one philosophical innovation that was new in the Roman world that Christianity brought, and that was to separate acts, physical acts, from the person. Okay, so a good person could do something bad, right? And that's what made them a sinner. Okay, and that good person was supposed to feel guilt and atone and have penance for that, so that they could learn from their mistake, so as that when they finally were to pass on, they could be held accountable for their sins, but also account for how they'd changed over time. And this was something that didn't exist at that time, really. It was you were supposed to, you were kind of weighed against the feather. All of your misdeeds would be built up over time. There wasn't really anything you could do to unwind that ledger, although it might be weighed up against your good deeds. And based on the balance, then it would determine, where you would fall in the afterlife. Whereas the Judeo-Christian faith is like, no, you can ameliorate the soul by saying there is such a thing as forgiveness, that there is such a thing as overcoming your past. You're not a slave to it. The reason I bring this up in the context of modern corporations is it's not hard to see how this has impacted our global social media age. So today, people are attacked by massive social media mobs. They're publicly shamed across the world. And usually it's not because they've even done something wrong, right? Which is, sufficient enough to to probably not justify that particular that extreme measure. It's often just because they believe a particular point of view that goes against the accepted orthodoxy. But even if you did do something wrong, it is probably unfair. In fact, it is unfair for you to be remembered by your worst day. People are more than the worst things they've ever done. So, and yet the way in which our society is constructed is we've moved away from a guilt-based system that was the judeo-christian tradition, that you feel guilty, you absolve yourself, you live up to your highest ideals of yourself by bringing who you are in line with your best actions, right? Whereas now it's like, well, there is something about you that is defective. And because there is something about you that's defective, you deserve to be shamed and as a consequence, ostracized from the politic. Now, well, who sets these kind of ideologies, these presuppositions of dogma that you must adhere to? Well, it does seem to be corporations. So, previously it was the church, okay, because the church could do both. They forgive you and so on, but of course there was a certain way of being. The 7 deadly sins and the 7 great virtues that you were supposed to kind of continuously adhere to. But these were applicable heuristics that you could apply to different situations, right? There were commandments and things like that, but more or less it was, are you behaving in a Christian way? And of course, I'm just talking about the Western Christian tradition here. Like with the discrediting of the church in various ways, it's weakening in an influence across our society for better and for worse. There is a vacuum in terms of moral authority. Like, what makes a good person? How should you live your life? What is the nobility of spirit? What is the best thing that you should be striving for? That has been completely removed. So, putting aside whether or not the Judeo-Christian precepts were always good, right? I'm not applying a value judgment to this. We're saying that there was an authority. There is now a vacuum. How is it being filled? And it is being filled by the powerful. It's being filled by those with control over communications, financial transactions, entertainment, cross-border movement of capital. The most famous case was the Gillette ad, which was about the so-called toxic masculinity. There was a 2-minute montage of projection of a certain social attitude that really had nothing to do with selling razors, right? It was a long, long way. Like, it didn't say that our razors are good quality, that we manufacture them in ethical standards, we recycle the waste products and everything. It was nothing about the company. It was about projecting an attitude, right? And however you feel about the attitude is not as interesting to me in this context as the fact that it's happening at all. The fact that anyone could ever pay any attention to this. And we're seeing this in most major Fortune 500 companies at this point. Now, in some cases, it's sort of like perhaps just a little irritating, which would be like Disney, where you kind of reduce, in my opinion, the quality of production and entertainment by injecting in a kind of ham-fisted way a social dogma, to the actual quite dangerous, which is financial transactions. If you have MasterCard and PayPal, caring about your views on immigration as to whether or not you're able to purchase a house, then we're getting into very dangerous territory, and there are many cases of that, which I'm sure we can go into it in other videos. And so it's very peculiar to me that we are accepting of this, that we are willing to outsource our collective sense of ethics to corporate entities that have nothing to do with any of this. They don't set up schools of philosophy to discuss these subjects. What they are is boards and people of enormous wealth simply deciding what is virtuous, what is right and wrong, and then expecting consumers to go along with that. And what we have is, of course, a backlash against that, which is what happened with the Goya bean sort of case. Goya bean CEO comes out and says some positive things about Trump. You've got all these conservatives that are now eating lots and lots of beans to kind of show their support, while on the left there's a boycott. So it's not actually a universally accepted norm, and there's no consensus even among these corporate entities. So the consequence of this is that when you buy a handbag or you buy a chocolate bar or any other consumable product, it's no longer I'm interested in that product, and if I have an ethical concern about it, it's about the product and its manufacture and distribution. It's what does this product say about me in terms of my ethics and worldview? And this is something that we're all guilty of now. I do it too, and so for that reason, I just want to put it out there that we're not making society better in this way, in my opinion. That the judeo-christian faith, for all its faults, was at least a cohesive philosophy specifically dedicated to how to live one's life. Like that what they were selling was, yes, there was afterlife and all of that, but what they were selling was how you should live day to day. That was the product, right? Well, we have all these other corporations whose product is not that, but controlled by individuals that do believe it is their God-given right to be the next biblical prophet. And I think we should be very cautious about taking our revelation from corporate bodies. Let me know what you think. If this generated some thought, please hit a like and consider subscribing. We throw up all these suppositions all the time. We do a week in review where we have a long podcast where we answer questions and look at the comments. So please, get engaged and thank you for joining us.